This is the Kratom Science Journal Club with Dr. Jonathan Cachat, neuroscientist and expert in psychopharmacology. In each episode, we discuss an article in a peer-reviewed journal. I'm your host, Brian Gallagher, blog and social media writer for KratomScience.com, your source for all things Kratom. On February 23rd, Dr. Cachat answered questions for a Reddit Ask Me Anything on r/Kratom. There were so many AMA questions, he didn't have time to get to them all. So we decided to answer most of the remaining questions in a two-part Q&A of the Journal Club. Here's part one. So, these are remaining questions from the Ask Me Anything that we did last Tuesday. That would be a week ago, February 23rd. And that went pretty good. I mean, we had a lot of questions at the beginning. Not many people joined us live, so I think like the next time we do that, we'll probably do it the same way. Yeah, so that was cool. That's cool.
I thought it was cool for me. I mean, it was cool. You know, we had tried a few different things for some community engagement. And Twitter, you know, posting on social media, we got some responses. We got some people that reached out to us. But I think this Reddit AMA was certainly, I think, had a larger audience. And so, you know, it's always interesting for me, at least, to see where people's heads are at. There's the typical questions, but then there were a few that were like, you know, funny or related to something else. I think I got into why I would want to give octopus or octopi LSD or MDMA as compared to zebrafish or humans that I did in graduate school. So I would say that if you haven't checked out the Reddit AMA yet, it's on the subreddit Kratom, and it's a pretty lively thread. There's still some activity happening on it. And yeah, I guess today we're gonna use this opportunity to catch up on some of the questions that I couldn't get to that night. It was a lot of the questions were stuff that we had previously chatted about on the episodes. So, you know, if you're into Kratom science and you want to know what the latest research is, going back and listening to these Journal Club pods or episodes is probably one of the smoothest ways to do that.
Yeah, the one I'm looking at now is how does Kratom interact in conjunction with other substances such as alcohol in terms of liver metabolism, and we did a whole episode on Kratom and alcohol. That was number 10, Journal Club number 10. So if you just go to kratomscience.com/podcast or whatever you're listening to this on, it should be listed. But it's number 10 would be the Kratom and alcohol question.
And I think, you know, broadly speaking, it was there are no concerns that I'm aware of, like compared to taking Tylenol and alcohol together, where the two together like lead to a more potentially harmful byproduct in the like degradation of the alcohol or the acetylphenidine. With Kratom, there is some indication about the CYP enzyme family, which almost everything interacts with, but there's at least to date no like super alarming hide your kids, hide your wife interactions with Kratom and the liver as it relates to drug-on-drug interactions that I'm aware of. Have you seen anything recently, Brian, that would say differently?
No, I think just in general, it's kind of like a long-term thing. If you're a heavy drinker, like adding Kratom into the mix probably isn't good. But if you're a moderate drinker, there's no indication yet that it's like, you know, I mean, it's definitely not going to kill you or I'd be dead already right away, unless it was long term, I think. So Kratom does, I mean, I was just talking to Abhishek Sharma, who's doing some of the work he's a pharmacokineticist and he does some of the work at University of Florida. And he's saying that, you know, there are enzymes that might slow the metabolism of other drugs in the liver. But that's kind of like, you know, you don't want to take a lot of fentanyl if you have Kratom, too. That might be the actual dangerous one. With alcohol, I think it's more of, you know, long-term. You know, you don't want to drink a bunch of Kratom every day and then drink a bottle of whiskey every day, it'll probably just exacerbate the damage that alcohol's in the liver. But I think if you're a moderate drinker, you're fine. But I don't know. Yeah. We're not medical doctors, especially me.
For sure. Well, and the CYP enzymes, there are a lot of everyday food and supplements and stuff that also interact with the CYP enzymes that also, could potentially, lead to the effects of Kratom being shorter or longer, depending on what they do. But I think the critical thing is the fatal interactions. Is there anything that I definitely need to worry about? And so beyond like the common sense stuff, which I think I said in the AMA, was essentially that like don't live in the excesses. Somewhere in the middle for what you're trying to achieve is the best approach to it. But too much, too little. Stay out of the extremes. It's better to be moderate with anything you're consuming, I guess I'll say.
And yeah, this other question wasn't specifically about alcohol, but he was talking about CYP enzymes. And I put a link there in our notes for Sharma, who I just interviewed. It's a study he worked on. It's called Metabolite Profiling and Identification of Enzymes Responsible for the Metabolism of Mitragynine. And so the quote I pulled from there is, the CYP3A4 enzyme plays a predominant role in the metabolic clearance of mitragynine and also in the formation of 7-hydroxymitragynine. So that actually, that's a whole different subject, but mitragynine metabolizes into 7-hydroxy in the liver, and then he even told me in the interview that I just did with him last week, he was like, 7-hydroxy metabolizes into another thing that they just discovered that's also acts on the mu receptors, which is why he was saying that's why the stuff we get over here, the Kratom we get over here, is stronger because we start out with more 7-hydroxy, and so it has more of the opiate effects than like a fresh leaf tea does. So it's something that we kind of have a look at as Americans taking this stuff. You can't just look at the old studies with fresh leaf on traditional use and think that's going to be exactly the same, even though it's probably still relatively safe, but we get more of the opioid effects here because of how it works in the metabolism.
I wonder if that's an age thing. Like over time, mitragynine just like moves into the 7-hydroxymitragynine. I don't know. I'm looking at this paper now too, and it talks about demethylation and monooxidative metabolites. So it looks like the enzymes are doing what they normally do to most other compounds, but it does create 7-hydroxy as a byproduct, a metabolic byproduct. So there is some biological activity there. But was he saying that 7-hydroxy is just higher because of the age of the stuff that we're getting?
I was asking him about it. Like, is it, I asked him whether it was adulteration or because of it might be the drying process, because the alkaloids do become different after it's dried versus fresh. And so we're over here where most people are getting, Kratom powder. And so it's been dried, and so there might be more of the 7-hydroxy in it. Might also be that people are artificially putting more 7-hydroxy, but I don't know. I don't think many people are doing that. You could probably do that in an extract. But the other thing with extracts is actually now I think they're safer because Dr. Pergelic that I talked to, he did the toxic metals study where he found a bunch of lead in just different samples. He went around and bought it himself in Chicago, and he found some levels of lead that would be, if you're taking about 10 grams or more a day, then it might be toxic over time. That amount of level. And he said in the extracts they didn't find any because the extraction process, whatever it did, also filtered out the lead and nickel. That might have been another question as well. But okay, here, the next question. I like some of these names. This guy's name is Pseudopeen, Pseudopeen, which I'd love to ask him what the hell that means. But have there been any studies on the use of kratom to help treat depression? I can anecdotally say it's been invaluable to me. Is there any understanding of the relationship between dose/frequency and use and physical dependence on the substance? Okay, so there's actually two questions, but I looked at the first question we did. The second journal club was the potential for kratom as an antidepressant and antipsychotic. And as far as that goes, that's probably been the one that's been studied the most, but it hasn't actually been like clinical trialed for people with depression yet, I don't think. But right. This was kind of more of maybe like a article review or maybe like a social science study because a lot of people report that it helps their depression, because I can say that it just like, if you get the kind of depression where you don't want to get out of bed, kratom helps you, just gives you a little energy boost, kind of like coffee does for a lot of people. And and this guy even said it helped treat my depression. So it's just, I don't think there's anything, clinical out there. But I do think what this guy said, he's like, it helped. He said I can anecdotally say it's been helpful to me. So that's the answer I have.
Broadly speaking, it targets the same sort of signaling systems of dopamine and serotonin. If you're going to get an antidepressant or antidepressants overall from a doctor, you're going to get either like an older generation one that is involved in increasing dopamine signaling, or you're going to get a newer generation, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, an SSRI, where again, they're increasing the activity of serotonin in the brain. And so, really even beyond that, let's take the kratom question out of the picture. Just broadly speaking, there's not like, aside from dopamine and serotonin being involved and maybe some different receptor alleles leading to different severity of symptoms, that's really about all we know in regards to depression and sort of the other, those affective cognitive disorders. It's not like you could point to a receptor and say they have 50% less of these receptors, so if we increase activity here, it's good to go. Like the etiology or the causes behind depressive symptoms are vast and wide and, various levels of depth there. So, anecdotally, yes, people say that it can help treat depression. I think the paper that we looked at, it was published in 2020. Potential for kratom as an antidepressant, antipsychotic. That is a PubMed Central free article, so the full text is available for review there. But what it does is it proves or highlights the ways in which kratom and its alkaloids are involved in dopamine, serotonin signaling. And just from that alone, you could hypothesize that it would probably help most, many different forms of depression, from like low affect and motivational states to, bigger sort of the world is on my shoulders type depressive things. And so signaling the right receptors, yes. Then there's the other sort of like more qualitative stuff where it's like, well, it makes you feel good. It interacts with the reward system. So if you're feeling down, sometimes just feeling a little bit better can be enough to change your motivation and get everything moving. To the second part of this question, asking about dependence and dose frequency and use, we're talking about tolerance and tolerance development in almost every journal club and almost every discussion about kratom, because it's always usually framed in the context of the opiate use disorder. We know that the recruitment of beta-arrestin at the opiate receptors reduces the receptor intake back into the cell. That's the cellular mechanism behind tolerance. So without recruiting that beta-arrestin, the kratom alkaloids do not seem to cause the development of a tolerance as quickly or as intense as the other, opiates like morphine or the codones. But it does seem that tolerance can develop, I guess is what I'm saying, but there's not a clear thing that says like, all right, well, if you use this dose over 2 grams every day for 2 weeks, you're going to develop tolerance. It's not that clear cut. It's not really that clear cut with any of the opiates or any drugs really that is that clear cut. But tolerance breaks are a good thing, and just keep that in mind when you're moving forward.
I guess the next one, it kind of goes along with it. Is Kratom a better alternative to long-term use of painkillers for pain management? And it kind of like the same answer to the last one. It kind of depends. Like if you have serious pain and you can use opiates in a way that doesn't cause a distressing type of addiction, maybe the opioids are better for you, and you can get them. You have no trouble acquiring them and affording them, but yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on the person, but I put an article up, a recent article that said kratom alkaloids, natural and semi-synthetic, show less physical dependence and ameliorate opioid withdrawal. So there is some indication that there's less physical dependence than classical opioids. Demonstrating significantly fewer naloxone precipitated withdrawal signs than morphine treated mice. So, in other words, they're having less withdrawal symptoms if a mouse is treated with kratom than if they're treated with morphine. So it appears to be safer than classical opioids from a lot of studies, not just this one that I'm looking at right now.
Yeah, so they had an animal model of naloxone precipitated withdrawal. So they treated the animals for an extended time and then injected them with essentially Narcan. So the withdrawal symptoms were less intense compared to those treated with morphine. So withdrawal can be less intense, a better alternative to painkillers and pain management too. It does appear that kratom and its alkaloids have less potential risky side effects like an overdose, so less respiratory depression than the other classic opioids. So from that perspective too, I think most people, most of the kratom community knows about the eyeball wobbles. Like you feel nauseous and your eyes feel sort of like fuzzy around the edges when you've taken too much, but there's definitely no like nodding off or other potential, like if you take too much, you won't be able to breathe, scares there. So I would say it is a better alternative for painkillers for pain management in that there's less side effects and withdrawal and tolerance are less likely. But depending on what type your pain is, like Brian was mentioning, like it's not a silver bullet that's going to help everybody. But I think it's, much like cannabis is worth a shot and CBD is worth a shot before prescription painkillers. I think kratom is definitely worth the shot before long-term pain prescription use.
And I would say the only advantage to a prescription is you know exactly what you're getting. And with kratom, the alkaloids, depending on the strain or whatever, might be different. So it might have slightly different effects. And that's something that, they're trying to do with the Consumer Protection Act, is to make everything somewhat standardized, or at least you'll know what level of alkaloids are in there, so you can make a better informed choice. So this guy was talking, he had like 5 questions about testing. He goes, what kind of testing do you do? Do you test the effects of kratom on brain chemistry in humans? How much testing is being done with kratom right now? How much has been done in the past? What are you trying to achieve by doing the testing? Where do you see testing leading in regards to regulation? So they're trying to do clinical trials, and you did stuff about, you tested kratom on zebrafish, right? That's mostly what you did, and probably mice and stuff. That's mostly what's been done. And when I talked to Dr. Sharma last week, he said, they're trying to, they can do human clinical trials, but it's a lot. There's a lot of obstacles in that they want the source of the kratom to be. They want to control it from beginning to end. That's why they're doing that greenhouse study. And he did. I did ask him about it, and he said they are gonna continue to grow those trees down there, nice. Which will be cool. Yeah, and so they basically want a chain of custody from growth to lab, so they can do human clinical trials like that. So everything will be, standard controlled, so they can actually test the effects. So it seems like we're a ways away from doing that kind of thing if they actually want to grow it and only use that to test and whatever. But so mostly animal.
And so by testing here, they're referring to like what sort of experimentation have you done, which is different than like testing would be laboratory testing or like analytical chemistry, I think more specifically. So what type of experiments did you do? So I did mostly behavioral pharmacology in animal models using zebrafish. Most of the studies we read are in mice or rats, and studying the effects of kratom on brain chemistry in humans poses a bit of an ethical dilemma and challenge in that, collecting or monitoring someone's actual brain chemistry or signaling pathways is invasive and most likely deadly. So there are secondary measures that you can use that would be indicators of like serotonin levels or stress levels. You can look at circulating cortisol in the blood, but it's real hard to look at brain chemistry as defined as like at the molecular level in humans. And I think Brian and I, having started this in mid 2020, there are certainly papers coming out, every week, every 2 weeks that are fresh, and most of them come from the similar groups in Florida, but there are more groups popping up. So I would say that there is a growing amount of testing being done now, and it's more so than what it was in the past. Most of the testing done now is trying to understand like pharmacology, so pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, receptor systems involved, and it's sort of like the most basic pharmacology that you can do is really what people are trying to establish with the testing. And they're trying to establish safety, which I think is already well proven. It's not going to kill you. So once they have that, they're moving on to then like, how is this specifically working? Is there a pathway that we can exploit pharmacologically with like a prescription or a drug that can be patented? But basically, they're laying the base foundation of knowledge here. And I think that testing, in this last question he asked, where do you see the testing leading kratom in regards to regulation? So I think that the regulation will be that kratom has to be tested, in that it has to have accurate labels like a nutrition facts of how much metragenine and how much 7-hydroxy are in the product, like what batch of plant or leaf material that kratom, if it was an extract or capsules made from, and any other sort of like quality control type things. I am less fearful about the testing, about experiments leading to kratom being banned than I was maybe a year ago, in that you'd be hard pressed to find a paper that essentially says kratom is the worst, it's killing everybody, and it needs to be banned right now. Scientists are generally more, they condition things a lot more than that, and they would say like it may be worth more investigation to understand how 7-hydroxy is different than the regular metragenine. So I don't think that the research coming out, aside from just sort of like hedging their bets and being safe and saying, we don't know what exactly this means, it's worth more investigation, it's getting more and more towards supporting kratom as a therapeutic compound, especially in opiate use disorder. But beyond that, alcoholism, depression, anxiety, the research that's coming out now is supporting its use there and sort of laying the foundation for why those effects would be found. I don't think that the experiments that we see now are going to be leading towards prohibition. We think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah, definitely. I think just from all the stuff that's happened with the HHS letter to the FDA that just came out, but was written 2 years ago, where he said, I don't recommend this be tested, and he said all the right things. This was the assistant secretary of HHS, and I don't know why. There was some political reason the letter didn't come out, but he rescinded his recommendation for a ban 2 years ago, and it was 2018, so it was like 2.5 years ago. So yeah, it doesn't look like anything's going to be. It's not going to be banned anytime soon unless something weird happens, which you never know. You never know with American politics these days. Something's going to take a turn.
Yeah, I think this. I don't think the science can be used to justify a prohibition regulatory approach, but that does not mean that social and political factors could just lead to a prohibition because they want to. Certainly. That's certainly a possibility.
And this next guy had a lot of questions, but I think the one he's talking about a selective CYP3A4 inducer, like capsaicin. Is that how you pronounce that? I've only read that word.
Capsaicin? Yeah. That's
St. John's word. He said, should that amplify the opioid-like effects?
Yeah, so this was a pretty detailed question where he's like giving us specific CYP family inhibitors, of Kratom. And so the notion is that if you have the CYP enzymes inhibited, there would be less degradation of mitragynine or 7-hydroxymitragynine in your system. Therefore, when he says amplifying the opiate-like effects, it's really just extending them more or less. It's not necessarily making them stronger, but it's longer.
Okay.
So I don't know specifically about what a selective CYP3A4 inhibitors are. He lists capsaicin and a St. John wort. But I don't know if that's the case. I would have to look into it a lot more to answer specifically on this specific specific question. I've seen people talk about grapefruit as potentiators of opiates. It probably works by a similar way of CYP inhibition.
Yeah, I you know what? He probably knows a lot more about this than we do. It sounds like his questions are all pretty detailed.
I agree.
It's stuff we could look up, and it would take a bit. But maybe I'll have him as a guest on the podcast.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, it does seem like he's a scientist. He then goes on to say, explain why people using turmeric or black pepper are still claiming to feel stronger effects when that doesn't inhibit the 3,4-A. It also does 2D6. Again, when it comes to people proclaiming that they have stronger effects, set and setting, if they think that they're going to have stronger effects, they might. If they take action towards that, they have sort of like all the right sensory input to quote unquote feel it. How much of it is placebo or just willing yourself into feeling it more? I don't know. And is it, it's not a good or bad thing. There's no judgment on that, but it's just something that you have to consider, especially when you're dealing with humans reporting, more or less effects based on something that they're saying. If someone takes turmeric and it works for them and that's how they like to do it, I don't see any reason why not to do that. But if there's a pharmacological explanation for why that would happen, I'm not too sure.
Yeah, if there's anything I learned with all this stuff I've been doing on Kratom, it's like human beings aren't blank. We don't start off with the same blank slate of drug interactions. A lot of things has to do with your height and weight and your whatever, what you ate that day, how much you exercise, what other stuff you put in your body, and you definitely can't say this does it, especially with Kratom, because the effects are pretty more subtle than some other things, I think. But he does have at the end here, he's talking about how, citizen scientists, most accurate papers require paid access. PubMed Central is a great place to find open access articles and publish, peer-reviewed publications. So PMC, if you go to PubMed Central. Yeah. Also Frontiers, the Frontiers Journal or Public Library of Science, PLOS. They have creative articles that are also open source. I wouldn't say that the latest and most accurate papers require paid access. I don't think that's necessarily true. It seems like they're trying to do more that are open. And you can always go on Sci-Hub.
Yeah, right, exactly. And then yeah, if you find one that is behind a paywall, using Sci-Hub to get access to that, that's the way to go.
And
Brian
I
and
just
I
heard, I don't know if this is true or not, but it actually doesn't take money away from the authors. When you do that, it's like the publishers are just like way overcharging anyway.
oh yeah, well the authors aren't getting any money. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't if you're writing a third party a third yeah if you're a peer reviewed paper in a journal does not yield residual revenue streams for the authors, else I've been missing a lot of checks. But like if you wrote a book or something like that, you'll get residuals. But yeah, there's no money that's going back to the scientists on this. It was funded by public research money, and then the publishers lock it up behind lock and key. And they say they do that because of their overhead costs in properly formatting the document, which is pretty much automated at this point. That's a whole nother life
Yeah.
in itself. But yeah, it seems like there is more open access stuff coming out, and if you find a paper that you really want, check out Sci-Hub.
Yeah.
CIHUB.
Or contact me. I can get. I'm technically in school again. I'm going to community college, so I can look up articles.
Or we might already have them downloaded. I mean, I've got hundreds of Kratom articles already downloaded. So
yeah.
There would be no harm in hitting us up on Twitter.
Yep. Definitely. And I gotta take a question from a guy named Bloody Condoms. But it's a good question. It's not perverted at all. Does Kratom cause any neurotoxic harm, and is it safe for long-term use? Now, so far, the only long-term users have been in Southeast Asia, and there was a couple from Malaysia, which is the link I put up there, but doesn't look like there's any problem in long-term users. However, they're using Malaysian levels of the alkaloids, and like we were talking about before, some of our alkaloids, depending on the drying or whatever it is, are heavier. So it doesn't appear to be long-term brain damage. I don't know if that means neurotoxic is just brain damage or cognitive functioning.
Yeah. Neurotoxicity to me means like neuronal death. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be permanent, but it would have to be like pretty significant to start killing off neurons in your nervous system. So an example of something that would be neurotoxic is called serotonin syndrome, where you have too much serotonin out in the synapses signaling with the neurons, and they basically get fried, like overused, like and excited, like overactivity, and it can lead to neuronal death where like pathways start to lose some of their strength and connection. I don't think that there is anything to suggest that Kratom can cause serotonin syndrome or anything else that would increase transmission or signaling beyond the therapeutic values. So I think that it does not cause neurotoxic harm. It's not safe it is safe for long-term use, and until some compelling evidence comes out otherwise, politics not being compelling evidence, I think that we're pretty safe there.
Okay, that was part 1 of Q&A from the remaining AMA questions. Stay tuned next time for part 2. Please like, subscribe, rate, comment on whatever platform you're listening to us on. Dr. Cachat can be reached at jcachat on Twitter and pretty much any other platform. ccvresearch.com. The music is Captain Big Wheel. The song is called Moonrunner. Kratom Science Podcast is produced by me, Brian Gallagher, for KratomScience.com. Take care.